Welcome to Your Pharmacy Career Podcast, proudly produced by Ravens Recruitment, the experts in pharmacy career and locum services for over 30 years. Every episode is your gateway to new opportunities in the pharmacy profession. From expert advice to inspiring success stories, we're here to spark ideas, guide your career, and help you achieve your goals. Stay tuned. The next step in your pharmacy journey starts here.
Hi everyone and welcome to Your Pharmacy Career Podcast. I'm your host, Christy Lee Patterson, and I'm so excited to have you with us today. We have an incredible, inspiring guest, Michelle Lynch. Michelle is the CEO of Ramsay Pharmacy and Psychology Group, and her career journey is one that I know will motivate and resonate with so many of you. In today's episode, we'll be chatting about her journey from pharmacist to CEO, the challenges she's overcome, and the defining moments that shaped her leadership style. So let's dive in and welcome Michelle to the podcast.
Thanks, Christy Lee. Delighted to be here today. Very excited.
Thank you so much for joining us. So Michelle, let's just start right at the beginning. And why did you decide to become a pharmacist?
Good question. A long time ago. So I'm at that stage in my career and life where you kind of reflect back and you go, I'm not maybe one of the junior babies anymore. I can remember very distinctly, I was doing year 12. I had to make the choice back then. I was one of the first years I had done the change in VCE. And so we have different marks and a whole range of things. And I was putting my selection in and I was talking to my mother, who was a teacher, and she goes to me, I think you should do pharmacy. And I said, why is that, Mum? And she goes, well, you like science, good career path, good for a woman if you want to have a family and the flexibility that offers life. And I think you should do that. And so that became my fourth choice because I wanted to actually do law and I missed out on law by 2 points. But I think there was a serendipitous component around that. At the time, one of my best friends, her brother was doing pharmacy. He was in second year at the time. So when I came to join first year, he was in third year. And he loved it, and we all probably had the same affinity in terms of what we liked in science and maths and physics and biology and chemistry. And so here we are. And I think I reflect now where I am in my life. There was pharmacy, and I think that was, again, as I said, a serendipitous moment. But it has provided me with such great opportunity, and more broadly than I could have probably ever have imagined.
I totally agree. And I think as the longer I'm in pharmacy, it just opens up more and more doors. And I know my mum actually said I should have been a pharmacist as well, but I didn't listen straight away and I did something else first. And then I decided to, switch degrees and go into pharmacy. And she goes to me, oh, do you remember I actually suggested pharmacy to you? I'm like, no, I don't remember that.
It's always wise words that parents provide. And you, at the time, you always want to make your own path, don't you?
Exactly.
Yes, I'll define that myself, thank you, but often they are very right.
Yes, exactly, especially when you get a bit older and you reflect and think, okay, yep, I understand.
Correct.
So once you made that decision and started studying at Monash University, I believe, what were those early years like? Did you already have a vision as to where you thought your career would go, or were you just sort of thinking, just head down, bum up, let's just get to the end of the degree?
Yeah, interesting. So I found first year really challenging. It was a very big social year, let's be frank.
Yes, let's be totally honest.
That freedom and that, different learning environment and friendships that I cemented that year, I am still friends with them to that day. They are very much part of my circle of supporters and friends and colleagues. And so that was a very big friendship year and a social year. And it wasn't really so I did a 3-year degree and then was pre-reg back then. It wasn't until my third year that the penny started to kind of drop. In the first 2 years, I found it very academic. I couldn't really understand what I was going to be doing. And then in third year, when you start to do some really practical pieces, and then I went and also had a job in a pharmacy for the entire time where in Melbourne, there was a man called Ed Johnson and his wife Marg. They owned pharmacies in Templestowe, and Ed and Marg had a pharmacy student on each night of the week between 6 and 9 that worked with a pharmacist and another pharmacy assistant. And so you kind of moved different nights depending on where you were in your university degree. And having that experience in the background and then getting to third year and then kind of the pennies kind of dropped. And then I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to be able to do. And that's 25 years ago. And reflecting now, the scope of practice that we're starting to see the change in pharmacy, that's always been available. The skill set of pharmacists has always been able to do that. It's just time has had to catch up, health has had to catch up. And so, so that's when it kind of started to make sense. And then you became more, particularly when the working environment, you were able to do more. And so that was pretty cool too. So it wasn't a distinctive component around hospital or community. There was a big push back then to always do your internship in a hospital environment. And if you could get a public hospital environment, which were more coveted, that was the way to go. And that's what I did. I went and did my pre-reg at Monash Medical Centre. So there was 8 of us, and that was exceptional too, because the 8 of you got to experience learning together how to be a pharmacist. And we got exposed to every element across the hospital. So we learned how to compound. We were making sterile medications, TPNs. You're on the ward. You got halfway through your regi. You might have been able to, you actually got the authority to actually go do a ward round by yourself, do your review of your medications chart. You come back and do a check-in. And so there was when you kind of think, okay, I can start to see the opportunities that this career could start to offer me. And equally, too, I think the important part, what I could actually offer to it.
Yes, yeah, that's true. I think, as you talk about what you just said then and what you could offer it, that's also really important. And I think that's something that some younger pharmacists don't really think about early on in their career. And there's so many other aspects to a person, not just what maybe they learned at university or in their career. And you can actually tap into those skill sets and bring them into pharmacy. So I guess for you, Michelle, what were maybe some of those other experiences that you've tapped into throughout life that's kind of influenced, I guess, your career?
If I'm thinking about it now too, back in I'll talk about pharmacy world back then in terms of support networks. There was a huge PSA, which I had great affinity with and participation in for most of my professional career. Back then, they really offered, they're very active in a state-based level, and there was a great, I suppose, cohort of pharmacists who were very passionate about mentoring younger pharmacists and providing back, but more broadly to the community and not just the profession and not just a career kind of perspective. And so there were key people back then who helped shape that for me and giving back. And so, Kay Dunkley, used to be, oh my goodness, I can't remember what the name was, but it was an early version of ECP, essentially, early career pharmacists. We would meet together. It was all voluntary. There was a whole range of different spectrum of people. And one of the first things we did was to write guidelines to be able to help pharmacists provide medications to those who had visual impairment. And so we worked closely with the Royal Victorian Institute of the Blind. So we even went out there, we met people who were visually impaired, what was important for them, what was important for their carers, their family. And that started to really shape the other parts of life where thinking about other people, how they may receive the service and the care that you're providing from a pharmacist's perspective. So that was pretty fundamental. And I'd have to say, my parents are very highly influential in terms of giving back. Values are very strong to me in terms of who I am and where I work and how I lead and live life, essentially. And so they were very influential in terms of shaping those other kind of life experiences to give back. And so schooling and all that had kind of also provided some of those experiences.
And so you talk about your parents and some of the experiences that have shaped who you are today. Have you always been in pharmacy, or has there been any times where you've gone and done something a bit different? And
Yes, there has been. So in my probably early 30s, I got a little bit sick of pharmacy, to be truthful. I was at that nexus point. I'd worked at that time completed my internship in public hospital. Loved that. Had some time where I did work a little bit after that, then got a role in community pharmacy where I was also was in Berwick, which was kind of southeast of Melbourne, kind of on the cusp of rural area at that time. It was the biggest growth corridor in Australia at the time. And so they had what they did have as a bush nursing hospital up there, and that's what it was called. And now that's actually it's a broader St. John of God have a big private hospital up there, and there's a public up there. But it was a bush nursing hospital, and it was like 2 wards. They did lots of different surgery up there. And so the community pharmacy I worked for, I then provided that service to that hospital from that community pharmacy. So I'd work kind of half my day there and half the day back in the pharmacy. So that was amazing. And so then I'd gone on and done other things. I worked in community pharmacy. I'd worked for Australian Unity, which at the time were a friendly society, or they are a friendly society, but they owned pharmacies just in Melbourne at the time. So I kind of oversaw some different services there, was their professional services manager, and helped kind of professionalise the pharmacies that they had. And so we're kind of oscillating, and I thought, I didn't know what I wanted to do. And at the time I was working in private hospital and decided then there was a restaurant that my partner and I at the time would go to and talk to the owner and chat to them about life and experience. And he had been an accountant and he had bought this restaurant, and he was from Malta, and he had been there for 3 years and, loved it. And I love food. So we talk about, and then we would go and fantasize, what if we owned that? What if we owned a restaurant like that? What would that mean? And we kind of always said to the owner of the restaurant, if you're ever going to sell, just call us, let us know. So, and one fatal day he did call us and it said, I'm going to sell, would you be interested? And so then that started kind of the consideration of, we've been talking about it. Is this something we want to do? And I have family. My brother-in-law is a chef and they own a restaurant, and, got people that we know and trust to come out and assess. And yes, we bought that restaurant. So I ran a restaurant for 3.5 years. So I kind of worked in a hospital pharmacy for a bit longer, then stopped. Then I had about a year where I just ran the restaurant. And then I went back and did consulting work whilst we had the restaurant as well. And all those skills that you have in pharmacy about communication, customer first, talking to people, fundamental in anything, because it doesn't matter whether you're providing a medication or a meal. And yes, there are different consequences or risk associated with each of those.
Yes.
But they're all integral. And I always used to say, so it was really interesting. So, I like talking to people, and I knew I had a great loyal customer base that would come in once, twice, 3 times a week, host big functions there. And then they knew, you talk, and they knew that you were a pharmacist. So, you chat about those type of things. And you kind of got to be able to then share what a pharmacist does and experience. But, it also kind of highlighted to me was sometimes our disproportionate weight in society of how we value things. So I could give someone a bad meal, or a meal that they didn't like for some reason, and they would write a bad review about you because a meal that hadn't met their expectations. Yet you can provide someone some medication and there might be an error, or there might be something that comes deleterious to providing that medication, not by ill intent, but by fact of it. And people, generally forgive me. If you're giving someone someone wrong in the pharmacy and you say, oh my goodness, you catch it before it goes out, I really apologise, or you follow up. I've never had a customer yell at me for that. They've been very forgiving. They, generally forgiving in pharmacy. And so it really kind of opened up my eyes to how sometimes we in society value things. And it made me much more conscious when I went back into pharmacy world around how do you actually start to communicate that value and the seriousness of what you're doing and the care that you're actually providing. So a big kind of life lesson, even from a restaurant.
Yeah, absolutely. And running a restaurant, it's a hospitality retail environment, but as you said, it's very people focused. And that's exactly what pharmacy is.
100%.
And I worked at many restaurants while I was at uni and before I went to uni. And I think that definitely helped because you get to just experience different types of people.
Absolutely.
And as you said too, in restaurants, people are much more comfortable at telling you what you've done wrong. So that's definitely, a learning experience when you're in 16, 17.
Yeah. Well, and when we bought the restaurant, I'd never waitressed. I'd either worked in retail, different retail environments like Myer or somewhere. So had lots of customer service experience, but I didn't know how to wait. I didn't know how to put an order in and call it, when you had to then time it from the chef perspective. But what was the other interesting part around running a restaurant or in a kitchen is the disciplines around the role that each of the team members have. And look at even the Michelin star restaurants around the world, El Bulli, which is no longer exist, but how they organise themselves. And so that each person knows the critical role they have. You apply that to pharmacy, wherever you practice, community pharmacy, hospital pharmacy, aged care, prescribing, whatever that may be, the fundamental, knowledge of the role that each of you play to be able to make the next person be able to do their functional role and care for patient ultimately. They're all applicable. And the disciplines that are in a kitchen, again, are fundamental to what we then do in our healthcare and pharmacy world.
I think some of the points that you just touched on and that I think is really important in pharmacy is people understanding what their role is and what they need to do and what's their place as part of that team. I think any of the pharmacies that I've worked in, or just any jobs that I've worked in, if there's people that don't understand what they're doing, and whether it's a lack of training or just communication, that's kind of where the wheels start to fall off.
And I talk about it now in probably my role and the different leadership I've had since is about explaining the why. So if you know the why, then you know why obviously you're doing it, or the what, and so it actually creates purpose. If we don't explain the why, so even it could be to the customer explaining why do I need to ask you to come back tomorrow? They can then context it. They can then manage their life or reaction or so forth, or expectation. So any of that in a pharmacy world is really explaining the why is really critical.
Pharmacy Daily is a proud supporter of your pharmacy career podcast. If you're in the pharmacy world, it's a great resource to stay up to date with the latest industry news. To subscribe, just head to pharmacydaily.com.au to get the newsletter delivered straight to your inbox.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right. People need to understand why they're part of something and that impact they're going to have. Absolutely. So I'd like to chat to you now about maybe our post-restaurant.
Yes. My love of food hasn't changed. That's still there.
That's good.
People now get subjected to dinner parties where I cook, that's all.
But I'm sure they're probably really fun events.
They are good.
Really
They
good.
are good.
So you decided to, I guess, leave the restaurant at some point?
Yeah, it was too hard. Yeah, well, yeah, and it was exhausting. I've never worked harder in my entire life, and I work hard. I have never worked harder. It's relentless. It's a big piece. So, yeah, decided to leave the restaurant, and I was consulting for a while. I consulted with a group called Pharmacist, which is led by Michael Ryan in Melbourne, and we did great projects like different consultation around different sectors in Australia. Pharmacy predominantly, but, going in and assessing a private hospital or a public hospital and, what's the framework, is it best practice, and then coming back with a set of recommendations and guides to be able to implement. We helped pharma companies do a whole range of things. We did a great breadth and depth of work across the health sector in Australia, and that was really cool. And then I got to the point where I missed doing things, like implementing. And when you get called back to the same hospital environment department, and they say, assess these things aren't working. They might have had a new leader come in after 3-5 years, and the report that you'd written 3 to 5 years ago was equally applicable now. And you kind of go, okay, I missed implementing things. I missed operations. But the big part for me was that I knew that if I was going back into a people role, the values of who I was joining had to be alignment, because if they weren't aligned, then, it makes the effort of leading and, implementing and being operational a little bit more challenging. And so I got rung up for a cup of coffee with someone who just randomly one day, said, what are you doing? I need someone to lead our hospital pharmacy team, and did my due diligence, and here we are almost 9 years later.
Yeah. Oh, just as easy as that, right?
Yeah, it's just super simple.
I'm sure it's been a long road, and I'm sure you've had some really amazing successes, but also I'm sure there was some very difficult times as well. So, what were some of those biggest hurdles? Let's talk about the challenges first.
The challenges, yes.
And, is there anything that kind of stands out to you as you reflect on those 9 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I have to say, in my career, I have been very fortunate to have people who are great supporters of me personally. And so, from a development perspective about making you able to overcome those challenges or to manage them it makes it easier to be able to do that. I think probably one of the biggest challenges is trying to, sometimes you get pigeonholed too. So if you're a pharmacist, you can only ever be a pharmacist, and that's all you ever be, and so forth. So then how do you start to move yourself from being just a pharmacist, which is a critical role, to being a leader of people of a pharmacy team, and then a leader of people of a non-pharmacy team? And so I think that's the other part, is working through the challenges of, I am a pharmacist, first and foremost. I will say that, till probably the day I die, because that is very core to who I am.
Yes.
But you also have a great understanding of the healthcare system. You understand all the mechanics and all the jigsaw puzzles that go in to make it work. And so some of the challenges has been around, how do I start to make sure that people understand my skill set is broader than just pharmacy. It's also about leading people, creating vision, creating strategy. What are the values that I have to lead with? And so one of the other challenges has been, how do I get myself to that next level to be able to do all those things? And so have done different courses and put myself in different environments to be able to develop that skill set. And that's been challenging because some of those things may not come naturally to you. So, how do you also even understand finances? Like, how do I understand what a profit and loss statement looks like, or a balance sheet, and when we calculate different things? So that's not intrinsic to my wheelhouse. And so how do you start to overcome those challenges of even knowledge, so that you can be present in a meeting, understand your role, whatever the role you've been engaged to do, and to be able to contribute as well?
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you've mentioned there around pigeonholing, I have seen that, and I feel I've also experienced that myself personally. And it's kind of hard, especially in really large organizations. People really do value the pharmacists and they come to you, but then sometimes you really have to advocate for yourself and your skill sets to be given, I guess, a chance. So is that something that you did, is like speak up and say, look, I can be a part of this project or something like that?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. And so I have had the fortune of working with several leaders throughout my career. One particularly stands out at Australian Unity, and then my current, who's still my line manager. And so both of them have afforded me and put me forward for different things. When I've said, I would really like to be part of that, I'd be really interested in learning how to do that. How do I get to that next stage or be part of it? And they've both been able to help support that, and I've spoken up about that. We also have a really people leader and in our business, and having a conversation with her around, how do I, if I want to become a board director long term, or if I want to be able to get to a CEO position, what do you think, how do I start to do that? So she's been very supportive of me also to help shape that part of my career. And part of that was, I was fortunate. So during COVID, there's a group called Chief Executive Women. And at that time I had the CEO role of our business, and I wanted some kind of coaching and support around, what do I need to then develop in this area? And they had a scholarship program. And so I applied for that. Did an interview online, and then you could choose to, and I was very fortunate, I was awarded the scholarship. So they have about 4 or 5 scholarships per year in different kind of sectors, and I was awarded this. And so I then could choose a course that was with an international school to develop my executive presence and learning and development. And so I chose to attend the Wharton University, and so their development program. And unfortunately it was online because it was COVID, we couldn't travel.
Oh, yes. Oh, no.
So, that would have been phenomenal. But there was 26 of us around the world in different sectors. There were some from health. There was a group, 3 or 4, there was nurses and HR and different kind of mix there of skills and professions from one of the big New York hospitals. There were people who worked for Google. There were people who worked for Disney. There were people who worked for mining companies. So then, 26 of you all gone online from all around the world and learnt and developed with one another about your executive presence and your skill set. And then you went into teams, so you then had to run a company.
Oh,
and
wow.
So in the team, so, you do kind of coursework, and so you do kind of an hour and a half, 2 hours of that. And so, some of the most amazing, like it went from marketing, it went from finances, you went to like social media, we talked about procurement, it talked about negotiate, like we did the whole breadth and depth. You got assigned a coach as well. So you have a coaching session one-on-one once a week. And then you went into teams where you simulated running a company. And then at each kind of happened every 2 or 3 nights. It was a really intensive course over a 14-day period. And you then had to do different roles. So one day you'd be the CEO, one day you'd be the CFO, one day you'd be the negotiator. And so it was to kind of test all the theory that you had been learning. And you had breakout rooms, so you'd go and negotiate a price of something with someone, and you'd come back and someone would have to do the modelling. And it was excellent. It was like from a skill set and learning perspective. So, overcoming the challenge of how do I make myself be ready for a position of leadership and a CEO role, which was kind of my ultimate, aim. And how do I start to overcome maybe the knowledge challenges around that? And so that was one of the greatest kind of opportunities I've had to be able to develop that and overcome that challenge.
That sounds amazing, but it also sounds quite intimidating as well too.
Yes. Very,
Oh my gosh.
very, like, because then you kind of go, like, you do a model and you go, like, and then you got like a template, but like, oh, I don't know, the input, like, and so, and then how do you then, like, someone who would have that experience in the team, I need you to help me do this because I absolutely have no idea. But also that bit, the overcoming the challenge of how do I own up to not knowing, which is important, like I need help. I need someone to help me get through this. That's a really important part in life too. Like you're not meant to be the smartest person in the room. That is a key part, particularly if you're a leader, but being able to surround yourself with the brightest and the best and the people who have the skill sets, that's the key. And that actually is a joy when you lead a team like that. And I am very fortunate. My team who lead our business, that's exactly, they are the best of the best.
How exciting. It sounds amazing.
It's exciting.
So I guess all of the training, hard work, mentorship that you've described throughout this podcast, to me, one of the biggest values that is kind of shining through for you is I guess maybe like even kindness and being aware of people and their skill sets and supporting them and mentoring them. So I guess it sounds like you had that experience early on in your career, and I think those people have obviously shaped your leadership style as well.
Very, very much. So if I think back, outside of like mum and dad, the job that I talked about early on where I had worked at the pharmacy while I was an undergrad, where at Ed and Mark's Pharmacy, I worked with a pharmacist, Mary, and Kay, who was a pharmacy assistant. I was 18 when I first joined, and they were both 60 at the time, both of them the same age. And they had worked together for years. And Mary probably had daughters. They both actually had children the same age as me, and they were a delight. And particularly both of them were like, Mary would take, there'd be say an antibiotic script come in and she'd go, come on, you're going to come and dispense it. And I'd be like, she goes, no. So she'd go on the floor. And like, so in terms of providing that mentorship, guidance, we would chat about everything, like that was probably the first kind of from a professional career perspective. I talked about the PSA cohort that was around at that time, and particularly about supporting, I think it was a young pharmacist was what it was called, not early career, but young pharmacists, that cohort. And then throughout kind of having key leaders and mentors has been really important to be able to support me. And then what I am very conscious of myself is that how do you actually start to give some of that back? Because I've been probably fortunate enough that it's happened just kind of serendipitously. Maybe you put yourself in circumstances and you receive that. But how do you start to then generate that component? And so kindness is a very big part of who I am. I talked about I wanted to go back into a role where the values align from a company and organisation perspective. And Ramsay does have a value set of what we call people caring for people. It's very much entrenched in our founder, Paul, who started the business in 1964. And I translate that today to Michelle Lynch language of leading with kindness. And that's a really big part of who we are and who I am. And, we've had our conference in October this year, and it resonates with our team. Everyone provides feedback. Oh, that's really good. And kindness is not about being weak at all. Kindness is kind of denoted by about 12 traits, but it's about being kind to yourself, being kind to others around you, having the strength and resilience, the compassion, the humility, and knowing when it's talking up as well, being kind to the environment or when something's not going right. And so kind of that education piece around what does kindness mean and how do we actually start to live and breathe that. And so Kath Koshal is a lady who she won the New South Wales Person of the Year, and she'll go into the nominations for Australian of the Year to be announced in January. But Kath Koshal presented at our conference. And her company, the Kind Factory Group, is very much surrounded by that. She's had a phenomenal story, and she talks about how she's got to this position. And so we have just signed up to what we call the acts of kindness. So we've got a challenge for the team about what will be the 5 acts of kindness that you will deliver over the next 12 months. We've got a register, we'll keep track of it. And we talk about, when we open meetings, we have a customer story to keep us focused on why we are doing what we're doing. But next year we'll also introduce a kindness story. So what's the kindness story you've delivered? And so, so it's kind of how do you make that come to life in your day-to-day? And, it can be the simplest things, but particularly in pharmacy, I think, sometimes, and in, say in a community pharmacy, those customers that are walking in, you may be the only person they speak to all day or week. Think about the number of customers that come in and have 10 scripts have got to get dispensed. Don't dispense them all today. Dispense just these 2 today. So that means they can come back in 3 days' time. And that pharmacy is such a pivotal connection piece for the community. And then you translate that to a hospital world, for example, is that people are in pretty scary and vulnerable positions. They're not in a hospital because they're well. They've had something quite significant maybe done or a check-in, and being able to be that connection point of kindness to explain medication or some advice or whatever it may be can actually be very hugely influential on a person.
Absolutely. And you're right. In pharmacy or hospital, you're seeing people at their worst, and they can be quite, you don't know what that is going on in their lives. And yeah, I think sometimes it is easy to kind of sometimes get stressed when they're like, I don't know, when it's safety net season. And
yeah, because you worry about all the things that you have to do. And so, we talk about, you've got a catalogue coming out. So there's stock arriving everywhere, and I've got to get this report in, or we've got to have a team meeting and I've got to be on that. And so we become so focused on the task, and that's natural. We all do that.
Yes.
And so how do you pull yourself back to go, okay, what are we actually here for doing? And so that's why the value piece and the simplicity of leading with kindness or acting with kindness is a nice message to be able to share.
Oh, absolutely. And I also really love that you shared that you start with a customer story. I think that's really important. I mean, at the end of the day, that's
why we're there.
That's why you're there. So it sounds so simple, but it really does help because, like you said, humans, it's just natural behavior just to be really focused on the task and just, I need to get this done. Remembering that why is really, really important.
The bit with sharing a customer story, it's not always a good story. It could be a story where things have gone awry. And so, the obvious lesson in that is, so how do we prevent that from occurring again? And how do we do better, or what can we reflect upon, and how do we respond to that person who took the time to let us know that this wasn't up to standard or wasn't what they expected? And so I think the good and the less good are important in those customer stories. And we measure it, we're fortunate enough to be able to measure our customer engagement or feedback through what we call a Net Promoter Score. And so we track that across the teams, and we've got a very good, healthy NPS across both of our psychology and pharmacy businesses. But, again, that's just the constant reminder. What do our customers think of what we're doing? Are we hitting the mark? Because as you said, Christy Lee, that's all that fundamentally matters at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I think as I wrap up the podcast, you're now a CEO, which sounds pretty prestigious.
Sounds fancy, doesn't it?
It does sound fancy, but I'm sure it's a lot of work. Could you just share with us what that meant to you when you got that role? Did you feel as if, I've made it? Did you feel, oh my gosh, okay, now I actually have to do this huge job? And was it actually what you expected it was going to be?
Good question. It's funny, isn't it? Titles they're important, as in terms of, they don't know the scope of your role, but that isn't important to me as who I am as Michelle. But it was a goal to be able to, I was the COO, and that's very heavily operational and in the trenches and doing the do. And yeah, I did. I thought it was a proud moment, amazing. Over the last 25 years, 30 years, I have had the fortune of being now to hold this role. And it is a privilege. It is a privilege to have the role, and a privilege to be able to lead the team and create the strategy, the framework for how we deliver care. The equal privilege is having a team around me that I talked about earlier who are the best of the best. There's some exceptional team members, and some are pharmacists, and that's been a great opportunity to be able to elevate and recognise a particular skill set that one of our pharmacist team members have. And so we've got key leaders across our business that lead that. So we've got a general manager of ops who's a pharmacist. Our chief information officer for pharmacy and psychology is a pharmacist. Our system support teams, they're all pretty much pharmacists as well. Because I like the IT side, I like the system side. So being able to elevate team members who have skill sets from a pharmacy perspective has been phenomenal, and equally others too who have a great retail or merch background or people background. So it's not a point of complacency, certainly not. And it's a challenge, particularly when you've been in an operational role in the business, because the business intimately, how do you then transition yourself to a CEO, which it is a different role, it's a different scope. And so, that's been probably 12, 14 months now, and it's been a big learning curve, but I've enjoyed it, and it's been a delight to be able to do it because I've had an amazing support network around me to be able to work through challenges. And there have been lots of times where I've had to put my hand up and said, not sure how you do this, but okay. And so also, how do you elevate yourself so you're not in the weeds? And so then the team member who was in your previous role, allowing them to flourish and to make it their own. So yeah, it's been a great year. I've had also, being the CEO and the representative of Ramsay Pharmacy and Psychology, you also get asked to do other things. So, I was fortunate this year that I got asked to deliver the graduation speech for the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at Monash. And that to me was also a career highlight, to be able to be there again 25 years later to say, I was you.
Yes.
I was you. And what an exciting time of your life you're about to embark on, and to maybe share some of, as I've done today, experience and life lessons to be able to take you forward. So yeah, I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And I keep talking about Ramsay. I really love who I work for. We do some amazing things collectively, and I get to be involved in things outside of pharmacy and psychology broadly. And it's always interesting. So it's pretty cool to be able to do this.
Yeah, sounds really exciting. And I can just tell from hearing in your voice and seeing your expression that you really do love it, which is really, really nice to see. Now, Michelle, it's been a privilege to hear about your journey today. I feel like we could keep on chatting for a lot longer. And 25-year career, to get that down into 40 minutes is very difficult. But what I'd like to ask you now is, do you have any final advice or anything you want to touch on that maybe we haven't covered in our discussion so far?
No, I don't think so, Christy Lee. It's been a delight to be able to share my story. One of the messages actually I shared with that graduate cohort earlier this year was two kind of pieces of advice. I'd say know the values that are important to you. Whatever you do, if you decide you want to go on a different career path, or you want to be the best pharmacist, or you want to be a leader, work out what those values are to you that are important, because they will stand you in good stead. They will help you navigate the path of whatever you choose. And I think also professionally and personally. And I think the art of storytelling, there is a great skill, and that's actually one of the challenges I have overcome too, in being able to tell the story, because we go back to having the values, we talk about the why, and it's the storytelling. Anything, numbers are storytelling. A profit and loss statement is just telling a story of how well the business is or isn't going. And so the art of storytelling, your story, who you're working for, why you're giving that advice to that customer, the storytelling is a really important skill set to be able to do. And I don't mean it in a fantastical way to make up stuff, but the storytelling, the communication is key. Will stand you in good stead.
Great advice. Well, thank you, Michelle. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. I think what really stood out to me, and I'm sure to the listeners as well, is that importance of showing kindness to people, surrounding yourself with the right mentors and support systems. And to our listeners, I just like to say thank you for tuning into this episode of Your Pharmacy Career Podcast. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with your colleagues. Michelle, once again, thank you for being with us and for inspiring us with your incredible story.
Thanks, Christy Lee. It's been a privilege.
Thanks for tuning in to Your Pharmacy Career Podcast, proudly sponsored by the Pharmaceutical Society of Australia. The PSA is committed to empowering pharmacists through advocacy, innovation, and industry-leading professional development. To become a member or learn more about how the PSA can support your career, visit www.psa.org.au. Don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with your colleagues, and join us next time as we continue to explore your pharmacy career journey.